Okay, so welcome everybody to our course on how to rapidly move your coursework into the online environment. So Ruth and I are here with you today to try to share some strategies that we think will be most helpful for you. And here's the format of what we're going to try to do during the day today. We've got a lot to cover, and we're also going to try to leave some time open for questions and answers and things like that. So what we're going to be doing, we decided to hold this meeting in Zoom as opposed to some of the other traditional webinar software platforms, because lots of people have been talking about, hey, can I hold my class on Zoom since it is a live web meeting format? So we wanted to give you an experience of that if you haven't ever used Zoom before, to see a little bit about what it's like. That does pose some logistical challenges with everything, but I think we've got most of those things worked out. I believe everybody will come in muted into the meeting, but if you're not, if you will, please make sure to mute your microphone so we don't get background noise from everybody. We're going to try to keep this really informal and yet cover a good bit of information in here. So just, if you got things that you want to ask, if you will, put those things in the chat bar that's over to the right. If you don't see that, you should have a thing down at the bottom of your screen. If you sort of scroll down to the bottom or hover over the bottom with your mouse, you should have a thing that comes up that says chat, and there's a place to put questions over in the chat bar. We'll try to take those questions in context as we're talking about stuff, but if we don't get to it, we're going to try to have a little section at the end for questions and answers also. So we'll try to make sure we leave time for getting to that stuff as much as possible. So.
And we're going to try to keep this to as close to an hour as we can.
Yeah.
And we are recording it, so you can come back and you can share it with other teachers, and this will be an ongoing resource.
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple quick resources that may be helpful. We're going to be giving you a lot of links to content, tools that you might be using, platforms that you might want to look into. Those things are all going to be listed over here on this webpage right here, academyofclinicalmassage.com/COVID-19. No space, no caps on the COVID-19. We will put this web address up at the end of the presentation also, so it'll stay on the screen so you can write it down. Also, it will be, of course, on the video. So if you miss it right now, that's where you can pick that up. There's also a recent webinar from the Alliance for Massage Therapy Education that they did on Sunday that also covered a good bit of this information, or had some similar information. So if you will, look over there for those other things as well. So that's it on those other resources. And we're going to put this resource page that we have, the COVID-19 resource page, we're going to constantly update this page. So as people put out more resources, more information, things that might be helpful to folks, we're going to constantly put things on there. So it'll be sort of an ongoing growing resource for folks, of things that'll be helpful in there. Okay? So here's the deal. Question for us is, how do we make this transition to online learning rapidly? Keyword being rapidly on there. So one of the things that I want to emphasize at this point is, I've talked a lot about over the years about trying to do best practices with online learning, how to make things really good. Ruth and I have both done presentations and talked at various teaching events about this kind of stuff. Right now, as much as I don't like saying this, I'm going to suggest to people, don't shoot for best practices in online education, because what you really need to shoot for is solutions that are fast and can help you get stuff into this environment. So
Done is better than perfect.
Yes, what's that?
Done is better than perfect.
Done is better than perfect. What is that saying to the perfect is the enemy of the good, or something like that? So keep that in mind. We're not going to try to encourage everybody to do the very best practices in online education. We want to try to focus on solutions and strategies right now to help you get into this solution world to solve the big problems that are coming up for you right at the outset. So in our presentation and talk today, we're going to talk about and capitalize on things that are inexpensive, that are easy, but we are also going to talk a little bit more about long-term online education plans too, if you want to think about how this might grow into things that you're doing in the future to help you prepare for some of the things that you might need to be doing as you look at a long-term online strategy here. So big thing is that we want to focus on is to help students decrease their anxiety and help them get solutions to handle what your course challenges are right now. So that's
Yeah,
our...
I'd like to add to that a tiny bit, Whitney. I mean, that's a big message that I've been getting, is that students are just really worried about if they're going to get what they need, if they're going to be able to finish on time. Maybe they won't be able to finish on time, but our job is to help them know that we're going to take really good care of them. And, you know, this is part of how we do that. So it's really important for us to be sources of calm in the middle of this storm.
Yeah. Okay, great. So at the outset here, some brutal honesty about this online teaching stuff. For those of you who may be familiar with, or may be new to it, some of you may be familiar with it. We're kind of assuming on our call today, and the people who may be watching this recording later on, some of you have some experience with online education. You may have been doing some things before. Yet there's probably a lot of you. I've gotten a lot of messages from people since this thing got started of like, I don't even have any idea what I don't know yet. So I just know that I need to do something and I don't know where to start. So we're going to assume that it kind of runs the gamut here, but I want to talk in particular to some of those individuals who really are at the outset and you just don't know what you don't know. So first thing is knowing that this jump to online teaching is not an easy thing of just like taking on a new course or something like that. There's a whole bunch of things that are very different about teaching online versus teaching in the classroom. A lot of this involves technology, learning some more about some of those kinds of platforms. The teaching methodologies are very different. You will probably find as you start doing this that the preparation on the front end of this is a lot bigger than it is for just, let's say, preparing a lecture for class and planning out some classroom activities, because a lot of those kinds of things you may adjust and tweak as you're doing things in the classroom. And, you know, a lot of your classroom time is taken up with things like maybe answering individual questions with students, or, you know, trades in your hands-on classes and things like that. That takes up a lot of your classroom time. Those kinds of things will not translate well into most online education platforms. So you're going to have to make some adjustments to the way you handle this. We'll talk about this a little bit more a little bit later on, but keep in mind that the concept of time in class does not translate well into online courses. So when you have had requirements before of having to meet, let's say, X number of hours in the classroom, that doesn't necessarily translate as well to the online education world. So measuring time is very individual from person to person, unless everything you're doing is completely synchronous, all online. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more. Definitely don't recommend trying to do that. So we'll get into some of those kinds of issues and details a little bit later. But right now, our big understanding is you don't have a lot of other choices. We can't meet in person, so we have to find some other ways to do that. So what I'd like to do is let Ruth talk a little bit too about what the role of the online teacher is and how this is going to sort of take us in the next phase of what we need to prepare for.
Cool. Thanks, Whitney. You know, I will go back to the brutal honesty slide just for a second and say, you know, this is not a simple job that we're undertaking. That said, it's not horrible. It can actually be really, really fun. We can go ahead now. That's fine. Because there are aspects of online education that can be more effective than classroom education. And so part of what Whitney and I are hoping to emphasize today is there are ways that can make this work. It's a little bit of an apples and oranges kind of choice. They're both fruits are delicious, but they're delicious in really different ways. And so we're hoping to present the idea of online education as something that can be really effective, but just in a different way than we're used to in a classroom. Because in a typical classroom presentation, and I'm speaking here specifically about lecture classes, obviously, because hands-on classes are a different beast that we'll have to, you know, delay until we can meet face-to-face again. But in our lecture classes, a typical class is when, you know, the students are sitting at their tables and the teacher walks in with their whiteboard pens and they say, okay, here's what we're doing today. And they start writing on the board and sharing their information. And that can work well. I like to call my lectures interactive lectures because I do a lot of back and forthing with people in a classroom. But in this kind of setting, that's not happening. And so, fortunately, both the easiest and most effective way to prepare online education is to prepare materials for your students to interact with. And then we, the teachers, come and interact with students in a Zoom call like this, or a Skype call, or a Facebook Live, or whatever. And we'll talk about those options in a little while. But rather than presenting about marketing plans or diabetes or the bony landmarks of the humerus, our job now is to be a facilitator. What did you come out of after you finished those assignments that I gave you? What was really surprising to you? What did you struggle with and didn't understand well? And so these conversations that can happen in a live time, or can happen asynchronously if people are participating in a discussion board, they can reach a different layer of depth that you don't necessarily get in a live classroom where you are presenting things to people for the first time that they're seeing them. So that can make our role in many ways as facilitators rather than as presenters, that can make our roles both easier and really, really satisfying, because we are interacting with people after they have been exposed to the key data. Let's go to the next slide. So let me actually, before I talk about this, I want to just talk a little bit about why I have come to this position. I was recruited a few years ago by an organization to create an online pathology course for 60 hours. They wanted a 60-hour online pathology course for their students who are distributed all over the planet. And it's something I've been wanting to do for a while anyway, was to figure this out. And so I leapt into that, and hopefully, thankfully, I was able to call Whitney and ask for advice as I was building that. But I also Googled it, right? Let me Google that for you. What are some good practices for being an online educator? And there are several nicely written, pretty cogent and consistent pieces of advice. I put together 3 of these guidelines for good online education, and they are in our resource page. But the consistent things that you will see when you look through these lists, how can I be sure that I'm doing the best job I can possibly be doing here, are these things. Be available, be present, be a presence in your course, even if you're not there in person. Make sure our learners know what is expected of them, because when we set them loose and say, here are the activities, here's the reading and the video and the TED Talk and the worksheet I want you to do, make sure they know what their expectations are. Use this medium for what it's good for, which is for people to explore things that excite them, and then to come in and discuss it in the live, in your facilitation sessions. Emphasize how the information they are taking in can be used for practical application, so it's not all completely abstract and distanced. And then to do what we can to make opportunities for interaction between learners. And even if your learners are not in the same room, you can certainly put them in teams. I'm not a big fan of the student project where they work together on a project, because typically one person does all the work and feels resentful, and it doesn't. I saw that smile. And it doesn't work so well. But you can certainly, for instance, create dyads and ask people to wrestle with a question or come up with an idea between themselves, which they can do, on their own time. So there's all kinds of ways we can do this if we're imaginative and we use this opportunity to try new things. One of the things that Whitney and I did on purpose as we prepared this time with you today was do it really fast and really dirty. I mean, our slides are not beautiful, and we had a quick sort of discussion of how we were going to split out our information, but we didn't do a lot of rehearsal or pre-planning, because this is exactly what your life may be, as you move into this next phase of teaching. Let's go ahead to the next slide. So one of the most important things to choose in how you want to move forward is whether you're going to have events or activities that are all at one time. That would be a synchronous event, or give your students things to do that they do on their own time. That would be an asynchronous kind of lesson. And, you know, my own experience, and I think Whitney probably kick in on this if you have other opinions, I love doing both, where there will be, you know, assignments of things to do, and they're not all read this document, take this test. That is not best practices. And it's a good way to lose students. But giving people a variety of activities to do on their own time and then coming together for that facilitated discussion. So we have a combination of asynchronous and synchronous learning. Do you want to add to that before we go to the next slide?
Yeah, why don't we we'll flesh this out in a bit more detail as we look at each one of those. So why don't we, we'll start going into the synchronous stuff, and then we'll flesh that out in a bit more detail.
Okay. So in a synchronous event, this means everybody gets together like we're doing right this second at the same time. As we have seen, there can be some technical challenges, and generally it works better not to try and do it for a prolonged period. It really is better over a short duration, and we're pushing it today to ask for an hour, maybe an hour and 15 of people's time. But there are a number of ways to do this, and if you try and make it go longer, truly you're going to lose people, especially if they're not all in the same room together having a shared experience. But you can, you know, there are a variety of tools that are free. Zoom, Skype, conference calling, Facebook Live. I went to church on Facebook Live this weekend. It was really kind of cool. So there are a number of ways that this can be done all at the same time, creating a shared experience, but not necessarily in a shared room. Let's go to the next slide. And as we've said, in asynchronous learning, this means people have the opportunity to do what you've asked them to do, but what they will do is they will find the things in what you give them, the assignments that you give them, they will find in there the things that are most meaningful to them. It really does allow for deeper learning, especially if you provide multiple options of ways to interact with the material that you're trying to teach. So whether it's, you know, A&P or marketing or pathology or kinesiology, there are so many resources available to us. And it's completely great to ask students to find their own things that really work for them to help them learn whatever it is, the content that you're hoping to convey. So it helps with logistics. It makes our burden a little lighter. It provides lots of options. However, it definitely requires more discipline and self-motivation, because we are, you know, depending on students to make the, you know, to bridge the obstacle of saying, okay, even though I'm not attending my class today, there are things for this class that I have to do so that I will be prepared for my facilitated discussion. So there are lots of ways to participate in this. You could post documents for people to read. You could ask your students to post things that they find that are really interesting. You can conduct asynchronous discussions through chat rooms. You can prepare video presentations yourself or find other people's video presentations that you think are really interesting. You can send your students on internet treasure hunts to find things that are relevant and interesting and worthy of sharing with their cohorts. And Whitney, I'm going to ask you to read the bottom of the slide because my pictures of people are over the bottom of the slide.
Oh yeah, that's just talking about interactive assignments that are also available in the asynchronous model. One other thing that I would say about this too is that I'm a bigger fan probably of many asynchronous options than some of the synchronous options that we've talked about, because this in particular right now situation that we have globally is posing some really interesting, unique challenges in that everybody's telling everybody to do stuff online instead of in person. So now you got a bunch of people who maybe at one household are being told, oh, you should work from home, your kids should go to school from home, and you're going to do your massage training from home. And so everybody, you know, depending on how many computers there are available or other resources, you've got a lot more strain on the logistics of trying to do things all at one time and make sure it works out for everybody. So I do think this is one of those instances where leaning towards some asynchronous things may be more beneficial for what you're trying to accomplish in there.
That's a really good point. It allows for a lot more flexibility in people's schedules if they are sharing computers with kids or with partners, so that, you know, you can, in this way, you can do your treasure hunting, you know, at nighttime or when people are napping or whatever. It's you know, as opposed to having scheduled times.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say too, in terms of producing and constructing things, oh, by the way, this presentation is brought to you by Ben and Jerry's. So I put this up here because New York Super Fudge Chunk is my favorite ice cream. And we're going to talk a little bit about chunking here. And Ruth told me I also have to put Chunky Monkey on here. So this is,
which is my favorite ice cream.
Yeah, so cool. So when you're producing stuff and creating content for your students, this idea of chunking is really important. And what that means is break things down into smaller and smaller chunks. In a traditional classroom environment, of course, we are used to doing things in much bigger things like 3-hour blocks or 4-hour blocks or 2-hour blocks or something like that. When you're producing your content, try to think in much smaller chunks to make things where people can log on for 30 minutes, do some work, and then, okay, now I got to go take care of something else and come back to it later on. Putting things in those smaller frameworks are going to help you a good bit be able to figure out how to organize stuff that's going to be most effective for people. So some things that you can use to build your coursework. We're going to talk now about some tools, strategies, and methods that will be helpful for you. So we mentioned a little bit earlier, we can put up things in documents on PDFs that we might create for people to make them accessible. I'm going to talk a little bit about where you'll host this stuff and where it will live in just a little bit. But just to go over briefly some ideas of things that you might be looking into. People have talked a lot about video and audio. Can we start filming hands-on applications? Can we film stuff that we might do with people? Well, one of the benefits, one of the great benefits that we have nowadays is phones are great video cameras now. You don't have to have a lot of really expensive equipment. They usually take really good video, and there's lots of inexpensive or free video editing software. Most people have played around with this a little bit, just simply trying to edit and look at videos that they take of, you know, whatever, you know, the dog's frisbee tournament or whatever it is on their phone to begin with. So making video is really relatively easy. I'm going to talk a little bit in a little while too about where you put these videos, where you can host some of this kind of stuff, because it does make a difference in how you distribute some of these things to your students. So this kind of content, again, I want to encourage everybody to sort of break from your traditional mold and model of thinking like, I'm just going to film my class, what I would have taught to them. If you can, break this stuff up into smaller chunks and smaller pieces, because people generally don't want to sit in front of their computer and watch videos for 45 minutes to an hour. So it's just not that engaging for people. There are a good number of software suggestions that we'll give to you. These are all on our resource page, so don't worry about trying to have to write all these things down. A lot of these are inexpensive or free tools, like Audacity is a great tool for recording audio content. If you want to make some simple audio files that might be like a podcast, which is essentially just an audio lecture or audio description of content or audio presentation of content. Audacity is a free and relatively easy tool to learn to produce audio content. There's various screen recording tools if you want to do basic presentations from your PowerPoint slides or PowerPoint presentations. You can record those and upload them to a video hosting place that we'll talk about. Lots of different ways that you can put this kind of content together, and we'll talk about some of these other tools here as we get a little bit farther down the road. Now, one of the other things that I want to look at here is what you're trying to do with the course content that you're building. This is a diagram, I guess we'll call it, of Bloom's taxonomy. Many of you may be familiar with Bloom's taxonomy, but what I want to get across here are some important concepts of what we're going to try to do online. In the lower portion of Bloom's taxonomy is where a lot of content presentations live. And this is where a lot of just information transmission goes. So this is like if you're having a lecture from in your A&P class about what are the shoulder muscles and all this kind of stuff, you're really in the lower regions of Bloom's taxonomy. And I shouldn't necessarily say lower, but just left-hand side, because it's not necessarily better by being higher. It's not a value basis. We're going to say lower, meaning the left-hand side, or the lower levels of cognitive complexity. Let's say that. So
you can't get to the higher levels without going through the lower levels.
That's right. Yeah. So you can't talk about clinical reasoning and critical thinking skills if you don't know what the supraspinatus muscle is. So you have to do those kinds of things at the outset. So as you look at your objectives that you're going to build classroom activities or things, look at these verbs down here underneath each one of these columns to come up with ideas of something that you might do in building an activity for people. So this is going to be the earlier levels of cognitive complexity at the outset here. When you get into some of your online activities that are much more engaging, this is where I encourage people to really start thinking about this, because if you can get up to this sort of right-hand side of the cognitive process dimension, these are things that you can do with online assignments with people that they don't have to be specifically in a classroom for, but it requires a lot more thinking process and a lot more engagement with the students. Here are 3 different types of problems that your client might present. How can you discriminate between those, and what kind of, signs and symptoms might they present that would be different? Or here's an example of a treatment note that somebody wrote. Is this good? Is this bad? What was done well here? What could be done a whole lot better? This is using the sort of evaluate end of this thing. And then putting something together, creating small projects, doing a little write-up of something, any kind of Ruth has a document that's in our resources about classroom activities and online activities that you can engage in that involve students creating things and putting things together and producing content, producing knowledge. That's the upper end of this Bloom's taxonomy description here, or continuum, we'll call it, that really helps get people a lot more engaged in some of the different things that they're doing. So these are all really helpful strategies to think about what might I build in the online environment as I'm trying to do some of this kind of stuff. Now, a couple other things I mentioned earlier about video and audio. I want to talk just briefly about this. Audio files, you can record them, again, very easily with your phone, usually with your computer, a microphone. Again, I'm going to encourage people, don't start thinking about fancy equipment for this stuff. Right now, we just have to get it done. So use rudimentary recording things. Your computer can record audio files well. If you're going to record things on your computer, try to get relatively close to it so you don't get so much ambient room noise around you and people can hear the audio stuff in what you're doing. You might not really be aware of this, if you haven't spent a lot of time looking at online content before, but I have found this to be kind of what you might think to be counterintuitive. But if you participate in various types of online content digestion, you might recognize that there's a common theme that people will say is like, people will forgive you for substandard video. They're much less forgiving for really substandard audio. So it might seem to be the other way around, but just like something that you film, like in your, like here, all this stuff that's in the background behind us, or maybe your screen's a little fuzzy, they'll forgive a rudimentary video. But if you got crackling static and really bad echo and lots of distracting noise in the background, that really is a lot more irritating to people. So try to make your audio as clean as you can when you are producing it. As I mentioned, Audacity and some other tools like that are available to help clean some of that stuff up a little bit. And the video, there's some really inexpensive video editing software tools on the web, and we've got links to those in the resource page as well. So those can be helpful for you in putting together your video content. So let's talk.
That's not as hard as it sounds. I just want to say, once there's a learning curve for sure, but we're all going to have to climb this learning curve anyway.
Yeah.
But as Whitney says, if you make an effort, you will find that students are appreciative. But really, I also have found that investing in good audio is more important than fancy graphics, for sure.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit now about where does this stuff live? Like, where do you put this stuff and what do you do with it once you create it? Because that becomes a big question for people. Those of you who are familiar somewhat with online education things so far may already be familiar with the concept of the learning management system. But that is also one of the comments and questions that we hear a great deal from people. What is an LMS? What is a learning management system, and do I need one? So, Ruth, why don't you walk us through a little bit, like what is an LMS? Do people need one here?
Right. So there, some of you may already be familiar with some of these because Moodle and Blackboard are used in a lot of school systems. But what a learning management system is it is a platform. Another word for that is learning management platform. It is a program into which you feed your content, and then it helps you to organize it into specific lessons or processes. There are some free ones. Moodle is free. I think Whitney, is Blackboard free? I don't know.
No.
No, okay.
It's far from free.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's probably one of the most expensive options that are out there.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Very good.
Yeah.
And there are some that are low cost and there are some that are high cost. And so if you are thinking about using a learning management system, here's the advantage. You guys, you know Whitney. Whitney is a guy who likes to build things himself. And he likes to create his learning environment and have a lot of control over that. I am not that person. I want a template into which I can pour my content and have it be really stable and have it look great and have someone else be responsible for making sure that it works on iPhones and tablets and computers. And so when I was trying to figure out what to do with my online course, I went with a learning management system, and the one that I chose was Ruzuku, because it is not terribly expensive and it makes my stuff look great. So Whitney, would this be a time to just share what this might look like?
Yeah, we can do that. So let me come out of here for a second and go ahead and share your screen, if you will.
All right, share. You cannot start screen share while other person is sharing.
Okay, I've stopped now, and then you can go ahead.
Yeah, stop sharing.
That's right.
All right, so actually, of course, I do have the right one up. So this is a typical page with my pathology course on Ruzuku. This is in lesson 1, and each of these buttons guides people through the next activity in this lesson. And we'll talk about what lessons could look like in a little bit. This would be a Ruzuku page that would lead people to seconds long. So that's another part of a typical lesson. And then here, I meant to do this. That's all right, it went pretty fast. Here is a discussion prompt where I pose a discussion prompt and I ask for people to give me their feedback. And one of the things I like about Ruzuku is it allows people to upload photos or videos or something or pictures if they're not happy, typing out all of their comments. And this is in these discussion groups is a place also where people can interact with you to share specifically about Ruzuku. So I'm going to stop my slide share and we'll go back to Whitney sharing his screen.
Okay.
And then let's go to the next slide. If you are thinking about using a learning management system, one of the things you want to do is think about what's most important to you. And here I see a question that my chat room is closed. Is it possible that Zapier might connect some of these? I don't know the answer, and I'm going to ask. We will add these options to. We'll take a look at them and put them in the resource page. Thank you, Amy.
Yeah. Ruth, let me just quickly try to answer that question about Zapier.
Sure.
So Zapier is a tool that connects a lot of different tools together. It's incredibly useful. So when we're talking now about trying to sort of bootstrap things and make them talk to each other, Zapier is a great option for doing that kind of thing. And we're going to talk in just a moment about how to kind of bootstrap an LMS if you don't have a particular platform set up already. And there are things that you can do, like connecting Google Sheets and your email program by way of Zapier and things like that. So it is a wonderful tool for making some of that kind of stuff talk to each other and work together. So we'll make sure, I'll make a note, make sure we got Zapier also in the resource page.
Yeah. And in answer to your question, Amber, I don't think the LMSs talk to each other. But here's the thing. When I am uploading stuff to Ruzuku, I upload PDFs and MP4s. And that is something you can upload anywhere. So it's, you know, the source material can be used in lots of different ways. So when you're thinking about an LMS, you know, you want to identify what you want it to provide for you. For me, my highest priority was for it not to be terribly expensive and for it to be a really easy, stable interface. What I sacrificed for that is a lot of bells and whistles that I was less interested in. I want to keep my own records, so I don't need an LMS that keeps a grade book for me. I would love it if Ruzuku were better at interactivity and allowing people to interact, for instance, in real time with the videos. Ruzuku doesn't offer that at this point. Some of the more expensive options do. Ruzuku does have a quizzing, a quiz thing, but it doesn't give feedback if people get things wrong. It is not SCORM compliant, and that's something you would know about if, for instance, if you're working in a public school system like a community college. And there are some fancy learning management systems that fix it so students cannot see what anyone else has said about a prompt until they have put in their own response. And I think that's pretty fancy. But the lower end ones, you know, won't provide that for you. So that's something, again, with your presence and your interaction with your students, you can take control of that to a certain extent, you know, yourself. So as you're shopping around for learning management systems, these are things that you want. If you're interested about prices, I'll tell you, Ruzuku cost me $1,000 a year. And for that, I can load up an infinite number of courses and have an infinite number of students. When I looked at some of the fancier learning management systems, they started at $5,000 a year and went up from there. That was just, that was just out of my price range.
Yeah.
1 moment, I have to feed the dog. Here.
Yeah. We deliberately talked about having our pets and animals in our meeting because this is what happens in real life on online meetings and everything. Right. I decided to banish the birds out of my room here today, just not to deal with that. But we did purposefully leave the animals in here knowing we may have some of those kinds of things happening. I want to make a quick comment too, tailing off on something that Ruth said here about content and producing content that you would put into your LMS. Those of you who are looking into this may run across the term authoring tools, and it's talked about several other types of software. This is probably way more advanced than you need to get into now for what you're producing, but there are what are called authoring tools out there that produce online course content and allow for a much greater degree of interactivity. For example, if you're trying to do things where you have an activity where somebody might have a picture on the screen and you want them to click on parts of the picture and have a message pop up when they click on that part of the picture, you're going to need an authoring tool to build something like that. There's a number of different authoring tools out there. There are two really gigantic 800-pound gorilla players in this space, and that's Adobe Captivate and Articulate Storyline. Articulate also has another tool called Rise, which helps build other types of less complex activities and that sort of thing. We'll make sure those are in the resources, but I just wanted to mention those as in case you come across that term about content and authoring tools. That's what they're referring to in there.
Yes, and when I was in my early stages and Whitney was trying to talk me off the ledge about the authoring tools, I decided that was not for me.
Yeah.
So
they take a certain degree of geekery to produce things well and to want to get into them. So it's something that I don't recommend people try to get into right now for the things that they're doing. So that kind of takes us into the next topic about, like, what do you do if you don't have an LMS? Maybe you don't have something set up. What can you do to maybe sort of bootstrap this process? This is kind of into what somebody with the question somebody was mentioning a moment ago about Zapier, how to tie things together. Let's say you're in a school or an organization, for example, and you have two different course groups. You have a class A and a class B, and they're different portions of the program, and you want to send different information to them. It's really going to help you to be able to automate those processes. Now, you can do that with an email program and put people in groups, and that's a little challenging. You might want to use some type of marketing mail program like MailChimp or something like that, where you can tag people, and like you can tag a certain group of people to be in group A and a certain group to be in group B. And then when you want to send messages or content out to group A, you just use that as your tagged group of people to do that sort of thing. So that's one way you can begin to communicate with people, that if you don't have an LMS, you can use that sort of structure to at least get started with branched communications. You can also give people access to certain types of content in groups, for example, with the various Google resources like Google Docs, which are essentially word processing documents, or Google Sheets, which are online spreadsheets. And you can make these available only to people in a particular group. So let's say your whole class or your group of people in your school, you want them to see this sheet, but you don't want the rest of the world to see it. You can give permissions for a certain group of people to have access to those types of things. Dropbox is another tool that's really good at this type of thing, because you can make resources available in Dropbox. Think of Dropbox as an online file repository. So video files, audio files, text print files, photographs, images, anything that you want to put together in groups to have them available for people, you can put that in a Dropbox account and then make that available only to those particular people who you've got in your particular group. So you can also, for that matter, sort of shoehorn a web page into an LMS, meaning, let's say you've got a website for your school, you can have a dedicated web page. If, for example, I'll speak about this in WordPress, because this is the most common platform that people do for their websites. You can have a password protected WordPress page on your website, and only your students who are in that particular class get the password to be able to access the content on that page. So that'd be one way that you can get a fair amount of content posted to people or presented to them in a way that they can have access to it without the rest of the world being able to see that. So it's, again, it ain't pretty, but it's functional and it will work in the meantime here. So couple other things. Ruth, you want to talk a little bit about some actually, I'm going to talk about these resources here. We mentioned these earlier, I think, in what we were talking about. A couple things. If you want to look at some things that have already been produced and maybe incorporate them into a lesson, there's tons of good stuff on the Khan Academy and Coursera that, like, anatomy, physiology, business practices, things like that. You could have people go through some of these lessons and use these lessons as an assignment for them to do. And then maybe you create a group of questions about those lessons or videos that they saw on Khan or Coursera or anywhere else. And that is part of an assignment of what they go through. So you can have them look at these different platforms. Again, we'll make sure that those are on the resource page as well. Open educational resources are getting increasingly popular. You may see this described with the abbreviation OER, which stands for Open Educational Resources. These are essentially free and available academic resources that you can take and put into your own format, whether you put it into a course structure or that you're using, or maybe you just use it as an ancillary thing to have people go to this particular page and look at this kind of content. Those are considered open educational resources. Think about this like, Wikipedia for academic content. It's an online, freely available resource that you can use to distribute all kinds of things that people might be using. TED Talks, another great one that's available to do that sort of thing for all kinds of great topics. There's some fascinating stuff on TED Talks that's really applicable for a lot of massage things. So again, let people go view the TED Talk and then maybe answer questions about it or do an assignment that's based on that particular TED Talk. Those are some different ways that you could do this kind of thing. So let's talk a little bit about what a lesson could look like. Ruth, what do you want to talk to us about with some of these things we can do here? Can't hear you. Okay. Ruth, hey
Got
Ruth,
it. All right, thank you.
You're muted, yeah.
Thank you. I kept getting the message that the host muted me. This is my life. Thanks a lot, Whitney.
Okay. I was clicking the unmute button here while you're, so.
It's fine. So, you know, this may drill down to a level of detail that may or may be useful for some people or less useful for others, but I thought it would be helpful to have an example of what a typical weekly lesson might look like. And so what that might look like is providing a list of objectives and expectations so people know what they're meant to do, providing an assigned segment of text or reading, maybe assigning some relevant videos. As we said, the Khan Academy is an astonishing resource. TED Talks, these open educational resources that Whitney was talking about. And, you know, the thing about that is you really need to preview them first to make sure that they're relevant and at the level that's appropriate for your students. And that's, you know, partly your job as you're prepping a weekly lesson. You might then assign a relevant student activity or two, you know, for instance, go and look at 10 business cards and tell me what you like and dislike about them or something like that. And then get together in your synchronous setting and facilitate a discussion of what people discovered. So I'm hoping that this looks attractive and easy to do because it can be really fun. Because it allows people, the feedback that I get that people really love is having the choice of various student activities so they can do the things that are really most meaningful for them to interact with specific kind of information. Let's go to the next slide, Whit. Oh, here we go.
Yeah, so this is one of our big challenges, are the assessment activities that you might be doing. So I would really encourage you while we're in this sort of online urgency format to focus a good bit more of attention on formative assessment activities. So, and again, just as a brief review, those are activities where students have an opportunity to maybe practice tests, do some sample quizzing activities, things that are not going to be counted on their grade, but will help them reinforce the learning and the activities they're doing. Those formative assessments can be engaging learning processes that really strengthen the different things that they're doing. So when they come to the point of having to go back and actually do their full, summative testing later on when they're back in the classroom or things like that, they've gotten a lot of sort of practice at going through that content. Doing online assessments for an end of the module anatomy test, on doing those kinds of tests online poses lots of challenges right now that you may not be prepared for. So my encouragement is if you can postpone that kind of stuff until you can get back in the classroom, or the other option is make your assessment challenges go towards the right-hand side of that Bloom's taxonomy, meaning just assume from the get-go that everything is an open book evaluation. And don't make it so that you're just asking people to regurgitate content, but you're actually asking them to produce something and put something together which you would assess later on and assess the quality of their presentation or the quality of what they put together for you. So this gives you the opportunity to really force them into those higher end of the Bloom's taxonomy process and produce really good, a good online activity for them at the same time. So those will be our challenges, exam security, did this person do the work, all that kind of stuff certainly does become more challenging. And if you haven't spent the time building some of these things out at the beginning, this isn't the time to try to do it really well and really nicely. We got to kind of get down and dirty and try to make things as simple as possible. So try to keep those things really simple with formative assessment activities and get into the learning process with them as much as possible.
I have a couple of things to add to that, but first, someone is emptying their dishwasher, which is completely awesome. I would love for you to come to my house and do mine, but if you would hit the mute button, I would be grateful.
Yeah.
A thing that I would add to that, let's see, now I can't remember what it was. Oh, yes. A really underused resource with assessment challenges is your textbooks. Most textbooks have end of chapter review questions. Many textbooks have online resources with practice quizzes. It is completely wonderful to really explore the materials you already have available to you. I'm constantly talking to people who never knew that, for instance, my book comes with a complete set of PowerPoint slide decks. You don't have to make up your own PowerPoints if you don't want to. And it has practice tests, and it has chapter review questions and the answers to them that are available. And, so you may have more available to you than you knew when it comes to thinking about how you're going to assess people's progress.
All right, great. So we've got a few minutes left here in our time. So I'm going to leave the resource page on the screen for a few minutes so you can write that down if you need to, but just want to see if there's any particular questions that people have. We don't have a large number of people in here. So if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question with the audio, you're certainly welcome to do that. Ruth, I can't see the chat stream, so do we have questions in the chat stream we need to address first?
We do not. We have gotten to all the questions on the chat screen. I will add one more thing, and maybe Whitney, you can make a note to put this on the resource page as well. I see that, Randy, I'll get to it in a second. Another resource that is underused is our trade journals. Massage and Bodywork, Massage Today, Massage Therapy Journal, Massage Magazine all have made themselves available online for free. And, Whitney and I are contributors to these, and so are a lot of other great people. And so if you are looking for more material on a particular topic, then the trade journals may be a really good resource for you as well. Whitney, I see a question on the chat room. Do the synchronous learning opportunities count as contact hours or non-contact?
Who's asking that question?
That's Randy Anschultz.
Yeah, Randy, you're in Oregon, so it kind of depends. The way this has generally been done in Oregon is they can count, and I'm assuming we're talking about the continuing education here, not entry level. So on the CE world, they can count, asynchronous activities can count if there is a teacher that helps facilitate the coursework. So for example, and this is something we didn't get into a whole lot, you can have online education where you produce the content and you put it up online and people just go do the course content. Maybe it's a PDF that they read or a video that they watch, and then they take a test, and who created the course, you never have any idea who that is because you never interact with them. That would not be counted as contact CE. In a different type of course content, for example, what we do with our courses is I am intricately involved with all the students that are going through the coursework. So they have assignments that they have to submit to me. They can ask me questions at any point in the coursework. There's activities where we interact with each other. When there is a teacher in the course that you can ask questions and can help facilitate what you're doing, the learning process, that's generally counted as a contact hour CE for online education. And again, that's based on the Oregon rules. So I don't know if that is different in other states. I don't know about any other states that have the contact versus the non-contact rule. And actually, Oregon is looking to change that concept anyway into something that actually makes a lot more sense, because it doesn't make a whole lot of sense the way it's described and defined. But anyway, we're clearing that up in the state.
So Randy says, brilliant, thank you.
Okay.
And I will add that, we're all in the same boat in terms of massage school educators trying to meet their state requirements while moving things to online formats. And I think we're all just going to have to be as versatile and flexible as we can be. Make sure to keep records of everything that you're doing and how you're doing it, so that if it comes, if push comes to shove, you can demonstrate what you did to meet your students' needs during this really weird time.
Yeah. Other questions? Anything else there on the chat bar, or anything that
Not so
anybody has
far.
questions
We've
about?
had a so. Do you know anything about breakout rooms on Zoom, Whitney? This is a new concept to me.
Yeah, I'm not sure if they're the same thing that people are talking about with Zoom rooms, which they also
Oh,
call that, which
probably.
is basically it's like a Zoom meeting like this that just kind of stays open all the time. So, for example, students can come and go at different times and meet each other there, see each other there. I haven't used them personally, so I don't have a lot of experience with them, but that is my understanding of the idea behind it, is to make it kind of like the water cooler, the break room, the place where people can gather together and have some kind of interactivity outside of course content and things that they're doing. So
Oh, that's
that's
interesting.
another thing to check out.
You'd probably have to have the upgraded form of Zoom to do that, right?
Good chance that you would. Yeah.
Yeah. So in case people are unfamiliar, there's free Zoom, and there's $15 a month Zoom.
Mhm.
And with the subscription one, you get a lot more services. Amy Hartle adds WhatsApp is also a great place to create a chat option where people can interact.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah,
Let me
I'm
add that to
showing
our
my
list too.
generational thing.
Yeah.
I have never downloaded WhatsApp, so I
Yeah. So WhatsApp is a lot like Skype. Where you can easily communicate with people back and forth. Interestingly, it's used a lot for things. It's a lot more popular outside the U.S. than it is here, but it's starting to kind of catch on a bit more here. So I'll make sure we put a note in there for WhatsApp as well.
Excellent.
Yeah. Anything else?
Seth Godin, this is from Sue. I bet that's Kalamazoo, Sue. Hi, Sue. Seth Godin just blogged about that this morning. Apparently, it can break students into small groups, call them back in a few minutes, etc. So I don't know if that's referring to WhatsApp or Zoom rooms, but Seth Godin is certainly easy enough to track down Zoom rooms, she says.
Yeah. Okay.
Cool.
All right. Anything else from anybody that needs to clarify things that we said, or you got questions about anything that we put out here for you?
We've given you contact information, so let us know if there are other things that we can provide for you. We're getting a lot of comments now, Whitney. Thank you so much for your time. It was helpful and nice to see. Even the pros have occasional hiccups.
That's
I
right.
love you guys.
Yeah.
I've only used WhatsApp for international calls. Didn't know it was good for education. Thanks. Yeah, thanks so much. We're getting thanks, and that's lovely. We were very happy to do it, and I will give lots of credit. It was Whitney's idea. We do a lot of work together, Whitney and I. We kind of try to keep each other on track with check-ins to make sure that we're accomplishing our to-do lists, and it was his idea to create this event. And I just went along for the ride because I am a person who is not a geekitude kind of person. So we thought we could sort of speak to both ends of the spectrum that way.
Yeah.
From William Dickinson, thank you very much for your comment, not a question, but thank you both. And you're welcome for the COVID-19 statement. That's a happiness.
And I would just like to take a brief moment to make a great shout out here to, I'm looking at the number of people that we have on the presentation here. For some reason or other, did that just go blank for everybody?
Yes. Yeah.
That's weird. Okay.
There we go.
There we go. I was just going to say, I wanted to take a brief moment to make a shout out. Looks like maybe 15 or 16 people in here.
Yep.
There's a whole bunch of Oregonians on here. So hip, hip, hooray for all the Oregonians, including your two presenters here that are, I don't know why we got so many people from our state, but I'm glad to see everybody here. So, and again, for those of you who may have, obviously, you're here, so you didn't, but if you want to share this presentation with other people, we will put a note out to everybody else about how to view this recording. Later on, we're going to put it up on a YouTube channel, so it's available for everybody else to do that. And then that web page with the resources will be up permanently as well. So
very good. And Cherie says, we will promote the webinar once it's available to our community. I'll share with the massage department at COCC. That's from Amber Wattle. And I don't know where COCC is. I'm assuming it's a community
Central
college.
Oregon Community College.
Central Oregon Community College. Yay! Yeah, it's really been a pleasure to do this, and I'm hoping it's just feeling a little less overwhelming and a little more doable.
Yeah.
And at least for people who are struggling with pathology courses, if you would like me ever to come and visit your Zoom class or your Skype class, I would love to do that. That would be really fun.
Okay. Okay, so we'll stop taking up your time. Thank you, everybody, for joining in today, and just hang in there. We're going to get through this. You know, people are strong. We'll bind together and do everything that we can here. And let us know. You know, we've got our email addresses on that last slide. If there's anything else that we can do to help you out getting through things, we'll try to do our very best for everybody as well.
I think that's that.
Yeah. Okay.
Right.
Y'all have a good day, and we'll see you later.
Look at that, 1 hour
Best
and 1
wishes.
minute.
1 hour,
Bye,
right
everybody.
on the money. All right. Okay.